There we go. We are live again Friday morning. This is the Palmer and Holsclaw show. Thank you for everyone. I actually know quite a few people who are like, yeah, I listen. I tune in right at 8 o'clock. We have a friend who's probably listening right now he's a trucker. He's on the road. Sean, do you know anyone who's actually like tuning in, who is listening live to this show?
That's not family?
Yes. Okay. Good qualification. Not your mom, not your sister, or your brother.
No, so I know my brother likes to hop in and get, as older brothers do, give me pointers later on in the day.
Gotta love those older brothers.
Yeah, so there are some folks. I'm glad that people listen live. I think some folks don't know that, hey, I can actually catch this later, like the show doesn't go away. So that's good. I mean, yeah. So I'm glad that folks are invested. So who's this one person that you speak of that listens live?
He's a friend. He's at the church. He's part of the youth group, and so I was talking to him just yesterday before he went on his next route. So he's listening right now. He's probably driving, so he can't comment. So that's probably good that he's not commenting on the show. But anyone can comment on the show. We'd love the comments. Today's show topic is how to talk to your kids about racism, which we're going to get to in just a sec. But Sean, you wanted to know about my vacation because you were on vacation.
Yeah.
Right?
So tell me a little bit where'd you go and how do you handle vacation during pandemic lockdown?
Yeah. Well, Sean and I are both threes. And so we always need to get a little bit of work done on our vacation so that we can relax. Is that right, Sean?
Right. Always a little bit of work.
So I had a book. So where did we go? We went to a small lake here in Michigan with some friends. And there was a fishing boat. There was a boat for inner tubing. I'm not a big fisherman, but I know my kids and my wife did. So it was just all laying around, all hanging out. I had two books. I finished one. I cracked another one because I got to have a book on vacation. And it was quite good. So that was a long weekend. So I think we're doing something else in August, but otherwise I think we're kind of in and around.
Yeah, I think I'm trying to put together something for August. Have you ever heard of the concept of an intellectual's vacation?
Is that called like a sabbatical? People always joke about the difference between a sabbatical for academics and a sabbatical for pastors. You're supposed to take a break for pastors, and for academics, you're actually supposed to write a whole book on sabbatical. So it's like two totally different words.
Yeah, I don't know about all that. I've not ever had a sabbatical. Not that I'm against it. So the intellectual's vacation is, and you've probably been on one and didn't know it, where you go on vacation and other people go to like beaches or amusement parks and like they have little drinks with straws in them for the whole week and all that kind of stuff. But an intellectual's vacation is like, I'm going to be gone for like 7 days and take like 10 books. When I'm not reading a book, like we're going to be at a museum or, go to an art gallery. And these are the things that our family was doing just naturally when we went on vacation. So like about 5 years ago, our girls told my wife, this was a year that we'd gone to Disney, right? And they loved it. They told my wife, they said, you plan terrible vacations. And she was like, what are you talking about? I plan terrible vacations. She said, well, what would be good? So this is in the middle of summer after we've already been like to Disney. And our youngest says, I want to go see the Alamo. And then this is when we were living in Central Texas. So we weren't back in Houston at the time. And our oldest goes, I want to go to Houston because the Magna Carta is there. Like this is what they wanted to do on vacation. And so she loaded them up with her mom, their grandma, and they went later in that summer for like 3 or 4 days. And I'm still trying to work through all the feelings I have about my children thinking that's a vacation. So when you say you only read 2 books over the weekend, I know for you being both a scholar and a gentleman, I know that is really relaxed downtime.
I was, my kids were super embarrassed, but I was challenging everybody to lawn games. That was like, so usually I don't get to do that. So I did a bunch of cornhole, spike ball, Can Jam, and we have this a Scandinavian game called Cube. So I was just like tearing it up, like a bunch of teenagers and dads. I was just like challenging them. So that was like what I was doing instead of reading. So, all right, you've shared your streams. I've shared my streams. So we're going to drop this intro that Missio Alliance put together because it's so sweet. Here we go. 3, 2, 1. Again, this is the Palmer and Holsclaw show, and we're really excited to have you all be here. Someone just asked in the comments, where do we find a recording of this if we're not watching it live? You can find it on Missio Alliance on Facebook in their video section. You can find it on YouTube if you search for the Palmer and Holsclaw show, and then you might as well subscribe there so that you can always find it super quick. So those are the two places that you can find it. We're not a podcast, so if you go to your favorite podcast player and you're looking for it, it won't be there. We're a video live broadcast or whatever it's called. And today we're talking
podcasts are so millennial. We're Gen Z the whole way.
That's
and you can watch it where you can watch everything. YouTube, as the YouTubers say.
That's
Smash that like button, subscribe.
There we go. Exactly. Thank you, Sean, for that enthusiasm. So today we're talking about how to talk to kids about racism. Last time on Wednesday, we were talking about the words and why words are important when it comes to discussing racism and justice and how we can have a better conversation. And if you've missed that and you're wondering where it is, you go to those places that I just talked about, Missio Alliance on Facebook. I'll drop those things in the comments in just a second, or our YouTube stream. But Sean, I'm going to hand it over to you because this is our first time having a special guest with us to kind of talk about things. I'm actually going to drop off, but Sean, why don't you say really quick, why is this topic so important to you personally?
Well, obviously, because we talked about it at a couple of shows now, and it's at the forefront of everyone's mind. I'm talking about George Floyd, Rayshard Brooks, what's happening in African-American communities and policing, that people are having really important conversations, but we're not just having those conversations with our friends and our neighbors and in our workplaces. The place that's most crucial for us to have those conversations is with our children. Mm-hmm. But how do you talk to your children about a man being shot in the back, about a man having another man's knee on his neck for close to 9 minutes? And we're all home for the most part still as the country slowly opens back up. And I don't know about anyone else. Like my kids are a little bit older, so the weight of it's not the same. But you're watching the news, you're reading an article, and the kids come in. And so I started getting questions from folks like, how do we talk to our kids about this? And so that was happening across our church. And if you want to be in a society that experiences less racism or that is fundamentally anti-racist, you have to start looking at the fruit on the tree, right? You got to go to the source, and that's always kids. Like, so how can we help our kids not learn some of the things that we learned about the way the world functions, and to learn to function in healthier systems and have better rhythms around that? So that's why it's important to me. And then our church put together, took that very seriously and put together some resources that I thought would be really helpful for other people. Basically, that's a long way of saying I wanted to talk about it in this forum so that people would quit emailing me.
This show is all about reducing the workload for Sean Palmer by broadcasting information so he can stop answering emails. Amen to that, actually. So I'm going to bring on Kelly Boothe, who this is our first time having a guest. So boom, there we go. And although she's in a different order now, I don't know. Last time she was up on the other corner. Darn it. So, but Kelly, thanks for waking up early and actually doing this show live with us. Sean, why don't you introduce Kelly? And I'm actually going to drop off so the screens can get a little bigger.
Yeah, thanks. I am so excited to introduce all of you to my friend Kelly Boothe. Kelly is the community pastor to families where I serve at Ecclesia Houston. And she has done an amazing job of kind of leading that team. And just to give you a little bit of color about our community, so much of who we are and so much of what we focus on is about children and about our kids. I think I can say unreservedly that we consider them the greatest part of the church. All of our COVID response, and whenever we go back to church, it's all centered around what's healthy for kids. Kelly and her husband Brian live south of Houston. They have 2 children, Addie, who is 7, and Kate, who is 2. And so that's another. I love the fact that she, like I do, has a Kate in the house. And so she's done a wonderful job leading that team, but also leading that team to help our families have a better discussion about race and racism. So I just want to give you, Kelly, a couple of minutes to talk about how have you and Brian handled this in your own home as your kids have asked questions. How's that looked?
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for the warm welcome and your kind words. I really appreciate being able to be here. And it's really near and dear to my heart for parents to feel equipped to have these conversations. So it's something I will say that Brian and I, we recognize that we are very imperfect at talking to our girls about anti-racism, and but we think it's super important to just have the conversation. And so we felt from an early age with Addie, our 7-year-old, that it was just important for her to have things in her world that showed her that the world is more beautiful whenever we can be together, and there's beauty in diversity. That I grew up, both of us kind of grew up, and we were surrounded by, it was a very homogenous community. And from the time we were, even just talking about kids, we just talked about how important it was for us to not have our children have that same experience. So we've tried to be really intentional about where we live, and the books that we bring into our home, and the friendships that we have, and also just being honest along the way with the ways that we have struggled. So
yeah. And I love that about your kind of orientation to the world. Like, actually, one of the things I love about our staff is that I think folks would be interested to know that you, as community pastor to families, like, you have the biggest team on our staff. You lead the biggest team on our staff. And it's also, I think, as I think about the most diverse terms of race, and our staff just generally, like when we sit down and talk to people about when they tell us why they chose to live where they live across Houston, most diverse city in the country, like it's a people who are really intentional about that. And so I think that's one place that parents can actually start, right? Is that, like, for our family and for your family, it wasn't just, hey, let's go find the place with the best schools because we're going to have kids, but what are the other ways that we want to educate our children about life and put down our, like, buy property in that area. So your team put together a resource packet that we sent out to all of our families. That is and includes, like, language and helpful tips for talking to kids. It's the same language that I use with adults at Ecclesia in our Color of Compromise discipleship group, and the same language that we walk through here on this show on Wednesday. Tell us a little bit, one, about how that came about and what you hope that to do, and really, like, what was the impetus for putting that together?
Yeah. Well, I mean, when the national conversation shifted from, I mean, we've all been just engrossed in the COVID conversation and all things COVID lately. And then George Floyd's death occurred, we saw obviously a massive shift. And I mean, I personally, I was thinking about, okay, well, how do I continue this conversation with Addie? How do I, and she's 7, I mean, like I've mentioned, and she's asking more questions. It seems like, her curiosity just multiplies by the day. But we wanted our families to feel like they had this, we wanted them to feel confident about having conversations with their kids. So I think one of the biggest barriers is just like where to start. When we've talked to families, our obviously all of our families look different, but our white families are saying, I don't even know where to start, and I don't want to mess it up, and I don't want to create more harm. And so like, how do I even do it? And there was this real desire. And so and then talking with families who are multiracial families, where one parent is Black, the conversation, the concerns are different. It's how do we have this conversation with our kids without creating this like vilifying all white people, or vilifying police officers. So that's sort of where this resource was born out of. I will just say, I mean, it feels long overdue, and I'm glad that it is now out there. But we were able to just partner with our friends, our social work friends over at Baylor University, and they just helped us tremendously with where to start. And yeah, I feel it's definitely a good starting point for sure. Putting resources in the hands of all of our families.
Yeah, and we hear that so often from people, just like, I don't even know what to do or what to do first. If you're just joining us, this is the Palmer and Holsclaw show, and we are joined by Kelly Boothe, who is the community pastor to families at Ecclesia Houston, where I serve, and we're talking about how to talk to your kids about racism. So if you've got questions, comments, make sure you drop those, and we'll try to get to those as we work our way through the show this morning. So I'm thinking about kids who are, we talked last time about definitions. So if you could make a top 3 list of like the things that you wish, like whenever it is, if you can imagine that weekend when we're back to worshiping live and everybody's together in our space, and the kids who come up to you and haven't seen you in months and months and months and give you a hug, right? What would you want them to have learned, gained from this time of conversation with their parents? And what conversations do you think are absolutely necessary for parents to have with their kids? Like, this is the thing that you have to talk about, even though it might be uncomfortable.
Yeah, that's a really great question. I think the one place is starting with the word, so 3 words. One, I would say the term racism, because that's a trigger word for some people, and I think it's really helpful for. That's what I love about those. I mean, you guys talked about it on Wednesday, but just having all of these clear definitions, so we're all on the same page from the get-go. And so defining what racism is and kind of debunking that racism is something in the past and something that is only for very overt. I think of the KKK. Whenever I talk with family about racism. That's one of the things that they're like, well, I don't feel like racism still exists because, or I don't think that I'm racist because, I'm not doing these things. And so I think it's really important for kids to just have this understanding of what racism is in the first place. And when you break it down, it, very simply, I just think it would be really helpful. And then I also think the word just anti-racism, I love that our resource is not just called, how to talk to your kids about racism. It's how to talk to kids about anti-racism, because our goal is not to just teach kids that racism still exists. It's to teach them that it's to, activate. It's to give them the tools to change the world around them. And so I think anti-racism is also very important. And I think that it's really important for them to hear about privilege and hear just more about what white privilege is. And I think that that's where a lot of people get stuck is, just not wanting to believe that white privilege exists, and being able to, if you're talking about it with kids, like that's just kind of a part of the conversation all along, then they're going to, that just creates more awareness. And so they're going to be able to pick up on these things as it's not going to all come at one time. It doesn't for any of us.
Yeah.
So it's just something that, you bring into their awareness, and then they can kind of see things over time.
So what would you say to the parents out there who say, you put together this really great resource for me to talk with my kids, but the truth is, like, in my honest moments, I just don't know a whole lot. Where can I get started? And so if you could talk about where can parents get started for themselves, and also a little bit about older kids. So obviously, like, my kids have aged out of part of they're in the student ministry. So the resource that we put together doesn't address like teenagers. And what are good places for teens to get educated for themselves? I know Ibram Kendi and some others have adapted their books, or had people like Jason Reynolds adapt their books for a young adult audience. But are there other places that folks with preteens, early teens, middle adolescents can turn?
Yeah, that's a really great question. So where can parents start if they're just looking for a starting point? The place, I will just say, I can speak just from personal experience, and a place that I love to start is, I feel like children's books just offer themselves, they open conversation, and it actually offers the, it gives them the opportunity for it to be like a child-led conversation. And so choosing really high quality books that feature main characters who are characters of color, and being able to just talk about or read about their experience. So on the resource, there's a handful of books that are listed, and they're broken down by age group. And some of them are actually just very explicit about experience, but others are they're just stories of people living their lives, which is also just really important for us to, it's just that in itself is really important. And so, I mean, we don't, you know, I was thinking about it the other day, and, you know, I'm like, our friends of color, like, they don't live their lives only focused around talking about racism and, you
Right.
know, what that's like. They live their everyday lives. And so
Mm.
for us to be able to read stories about that, and anyway, so stories or picture books are a really good place, I think, to start.
Yeah.
That's just my own
Yeah.
personal experience, and I've heard from others that it's really helpful. Even with our 2-year-old, we have, you know, board books that feature, you know, there's one I'm thinking of in particular that is Black women who have been leaders, and
Right.
just introducing this from an early age. So
Yeah, and I think that's so great. One of the things you said that really stuck out to me, I think it's important, is having it be a kid-centered conversation, like letting it kind of begin on where they are and where they can wrap their arms around. And I'm mindful, just because of who we are, right, that when our girls were younger, their reading was populated by both authors of color and books with characters who were people of color.
mhm.
All their dolls were people of color. And I don't think for the average white American that's very much something they think about, the idea that your kids may well be getting the impression that the world is entirely white. And if not entirely white, all of the main characters in the world are white. And so just to begin, like, one of the things parents can do is look around at the literature and the television that our kids consume, and who are the people who are centered in those stories. And that actually does create a certain kind of imagination about how the world functions, if you don't have any counter narratives to that. So I think that's really important. Like, I think I mentioned to you, like, one of our girls' favorite books when they were little was The Skin You Live In. And we read that to them all the time. And then when I got an opportunity, when the girls were kindergarten, first grade, second grade, and they did the whole a parent's going to come and read to the class sort of thing, like, I would always take that book, like, because I wanted the kids of color to know that they were seen. And I wanted the white kids to know that there were other people in the universe, right? Whose stories were just as meaningful and beautiful and valid. Which leads me to, I think, this question, which I think is probably our final question given the time, if no one's got one in the comments, is that so much of what our kids experience is driven by what they see in media. And the truth of the matter is, the more we're at home together, parents have to work, they have responsibilities, and kids are just consuming more media. Like I said, my girls are 13 and 16. My wife dropped the hammer earlier this week and said, like, there just is I know it's summer and all of that, but there's no television before 2:00. And you would have thought that we had just peeled off their skin, just from the cries of unfairness and brutality. And you're ruining my life. Like, I'm your parent. I was born to ruin your life. That's my whole point.
That's right.
So
that's what I've been dreaming about.
That's right. I woke up this morning and thought, how can I make life more difficult for you? So talk to us a little bit about media and kids. And I know that all of us could use less, unless you're watching the Palmer and Holsclaw show at 8 Eastern, 7 Central every Monday, Wednesday, Friday. But how do we shield them? Because, like, I want parents want and need their kids to know about George Floyd and all of the stories, Trayvon Martin, Philando Castile, all the stories that came before George Floyd. We want our kids to know that you don't need to see a man die in the street on a loop for 24 hours, right? So help us handle that a little bit better.
Yeah. I mean, I think that it's something that I still struggle with. You know, I want to be informed with what's going on in the news, but I also don't want our 7-year-old in particular, but also our 2-year-old, she picks up on all the things. And, you know, to have this going on in the background. So I think it's just in terms of choosing what to watch, what to put on the television screen. I think it's setting clear boundaries with our kids. With Addie, I mean, which is our 7-year-old, we, just like you were saying, Rochelle says, don't turn on the television before 2:00. Also, you know, I'm sure she's also given some sort of parameters around what's okay to watch. And so it's these shows are okay and these shows aren't, and that's, or what we watch is affects the way that we feel, and what are the things, just setting some intention around it, if that makes sense. So the cartoons that our oldest gets to watch, I mean, we don't have a ton of parameters, you know, super rigid, but there are expectations around Brian and I get more excited when she's watching like Princess Elena versus when she's watching like all Princess Sophia all the time. And so, I mean, it's, you know, seems kind of cheesy, but yeah.
We had one big rule when the girls were younger, which was no Caillou, because that kid is the whiniest, brattiest little punk.
Yes.
And it's like, we're not. And we would tell them when they were starting to get a little bit bratty, we'd be like, that's
exactly
peak Caillou. So we're not.
This is why we don't watch Caillou, right? Yeah, because now you're whining because you've been watching whining.
That's right.
Yeah, and that's how we feel about like the Barbie shows, and you know, it's just they start to mimic those behaviors. But
but don't talk to Catherine about Sophia the First, because she loved her some Sophia the First back in the day. So anyway, Kelly, I want to thank you so much for joining us. I think it's a great resource for parents. I am honored to be able to work alongside you, and you lead an exceptional team of really just incredible people. This won't mean anything to anybody else if you're not at Ecclesia, but just getting the whiffs and sniffs of what's going to be happening with camp, doing a virtual camp for kids, that just sounds absolutely amazing. So I want to invite Geoff to come back. We're going to tell you a little bit about what's going to happen next week. We do want to point you to a link that's in the comments. Yes. So
I dropped it in already, and so people should be able to find it for sure. Are you talking about that link?
Yes. Link? Yeah. And so that is just a link that lives in the universe. And so I think Kelly would agree with me, and that we want as many people who would find that useful to use it for their church and their family. We're all in this together. So
absolutely,
there's no PayPal link or anything to, you know, if you want to, I can, Venmo.
Say, are you turning them away?
Yeah, for sure. Well, thank you so much, Kelly. I was just listening in the whole time, and it was so fantastic. I do agree with that last point. We never let our kids watch Caillou. That's like the worst show ever. My kids are.
I always forget about Caillou.
Oh, it's the worst.
Yes.
My he might be embarrassed to say, but like my youngest son, who's almost 16, he's rewatching the entire Avatar series again for like the 5th time. So
okay, so
that stuff is just comfort.
It is. Comfort. It's like a total comfort
food.
Don't tell them that I told you this, but our girls, for whatever reason, have been binging through Boy Meets World. And
the original?
It is the original. Like, because they saw Girl Meets World, and like we would explain to them the backstory, because I was a youth pastor when that show was big, so I kind of knew what was going on. But now they are watching it and then last night at dinner, I let something slip that hadn't happened in the season that they are in right now. And like, you want it, like, yeah, like Rochelle was mad at me. They were mad at me. I thought, am I going to need to move out? It was really pretty amazing.
Well, sometime maybe with Sean, we need to do like the shows we watched growing up episode. That's just the fluff, just some fluff episode. So thank you again, Kelly. I'm actually gonna I'm new at all this. I don't know how to produce, so I'm gonna hit this button and she's gonna go away, but stay with us too. But Sean, we wanted to talk about next week. We wanted to promo that a little bit. We don't have the best title. What was your working title?
Keeping your faith without losing your mind, or losing your brain and keeping your faith. We're going to talk next week about deconstruction and the process of deconstruction. You've seen in the news, and you've probably caught whiff of on Twitter, that lots of Christian people go through a process of religious deconstruction and come out on the other side and say, well, I just can't be a Christian anymore. So we're going to talk about healthier ways to do that, why some of those projects go off the rails, why it is that people feel like it's either a version of the faith that they were handed as kids or no faith at all. So I think that'll be a fun topic to explore next week. Yeah,
I'm really excited to talk about that. We'll probably bring our own different personal experiences as well as the friends who walked through that and talk about, why is this happening and what to do about it. My practice one was, let's see, I wrote it down here, deconstructing without destroying your faith. So how can we kind of manage those things? So, but thanks again, Sean. Thanks for everyone. I'm going to put our happy ending music on here. Please like and share these episodes because we're minimally funded and we don't have a big budget, and no one's going to hear about this unless you all share it. So please do all that. We will talk to you on Monday.
See you Monday.